Hi there, so I currently own a Raglan 5-inch centre lathe, to which end I've bought this book, and I've got this from LATHE.co.uk. Tony Griffiths, very nice gentleman there, really lovely chap to talk to, and he supplied me with this book such that I can do repairs on my lathe and find out how it works, because I'm not really sure how it works. I've had it 30 years but not used it all that much. But the reason I've had to buy this book now is because if we look here, this is my main drive belt from the motor to the lathe, and as we can see, it's not quite a belt anymore, it's more of a rag. So I've been out and purchased from my local bearings company, Huddersfield Bearings Limited, this replacement belt, which I'm hoping will fit. According to people on Facebook, this should fit, so let's see. The inside of this new belt is like a cogwheel, but the inside of the old belt was just smooth. But being as the belt's running on the outside edge, that's the bearing place. The fact that it's a cogwheel inside won't matter at all. But I'm not sure how to fit this thing to this Raglan lathe. So let's go and have a look. I'm going to have to take various pieces off to gain access to the parts that need replacing, because my lathe's between two benches and up against the wall. So I've really no access to the back of the lathe, which is where I need to be. So let's go and have a look, see if we can do anything about that. But before we head out into the workshop, let's just have a look at a quick sketch that I've done, and also a photograph in this book, which I got from Tony at LATHE.co.uk, and this is the parts manual list that we looked at earlier. So working from the book, and also from people on Facebook etc, who perhaps have had a lathe outside casting of we're looking out the back of the lathe, looking into the headstock, and here we're not sure, but the idea is that this have the casting of the outside of the lathe headstock, and here we have the variator pulley, and out here is a motor with another variator pulley on, and the idea is that this variator thrust bearing here opens and closes the size of this pulley here. This is the pulley, and as this opens or closes, the belt which rides in this is either riding higher or lower in the V, increasing the speed, and as this inner pulley opens, the pulley on the motor would close, so the belt is running constantly on the sides of the pulley, but in varying stages along its length. But the instructions are, and everybody else seems to think that the idea is that the belt, which is wider than this gap here, which is what we want to get onto this pulley. So the idea is you take the belt, you twist the belt through 90 degrees, poke it in this gap between this casting and this flange pulley here. You feed it into the machine, loop it over the back of the pulley, and then pull it forward into here, and then slot it onto the motor shaft here, onto its pulley, and then you reattach this side of the pulley onto the motor shaft. That's the way it's supposed to be done, I think. But I've run into a problem with mine, because people on Facebook, their lathes appear to have this space for the lathe, for this belt to go through. As I say, you twist the belt through 90 degrees and poke it in, because it's obviously too wide to go through that gap. So even in twisting it 90 degrees, the belt was still too thick to go in this gap. I only had about 6 millimeters across this space here, and I needed at least 10 because the belt is 10 millimeter thick. So what I did, I drilled a series of holes. This is the thickness of the casting, and then the casting sort of lips round in this kind of fashion. It lips round in this kind of fashion, and this is the lip that we're looking at here. So I drilled a series of holes as best I could, as near to the edge of the thickness of the casting as I could, and then with a small steel chisel I broke those holes open and then removed this section of the casting, if you like, to create more space for me to get my belt in. But even then I ran into a further problem that I couldn't get my belt through, because we were all expecting that this space here would be completely free and I would just push the loop of the belt in, loop it over the back of the pulley and then pull it tight and onto the motor shaft. But what's happened in my case is I have this additional piece of steel mounted on, and I think we all thought that I was under the impression that this shaft here that had the pulley on did not extend this way, but on my lathe it does, and I would think that quite a lot of them should, really, in a sense, because this piece of steel, if I'm not mistaken, then comes into play. But people don't seem to have had the problem that I've had, that I've got a shaft in here, because what I've got this steel plate with 2 bolts mounted onto the side of the lathe, and through this plate and into the headstock there's some kind of a shaft or a bearing that goes in, because on here there's also what I thought was a boss for this pulley, but it's not a boss in actual fact, it's some kind of a bearing, I think, and there's an axle running through there, and in this metal plate here there is an oiler. You put oil into this top here and it goes through a hole there, through a bore, into this to lubricate it. That's what I'm assuming. I don't know this for sure. I'm hoping to get assistance from YouTube, Facebook and wherever to help me get over this problem, because I've got the issue now where if I remove this plate here and take it out, I would think that plate would just pull out like that, and this shaft or whatever would pull out of this pulley, and all of this would then tend to perhaps drop into the bottom of the lathe headstock. But that's not the case. What's happening is when I pull this out, this will not disconnect from here, and then all of this can gyrate around somewhat in the headstock like that. But what I want to do, I want to remove this completely so that I have that space to get the belt through and past the pulley to loop it over the back of it. Now I'm thinking, on my lathe in particular, I'm thinking that this piece here may be the tensioner for these 2 pulleys here, because there are further 2 pulleys that go up to the main spindle with the chuck on it, which is up here somewhere, and there are 2 belts riding in these constant V pulleys. So these don't change at all, only this pulley is varying, only this one changes. But these 2 here, when I'm moving that, these 2 are dropping like that on the shaft. The shaft is tending to drop like that, and I think that you should be able to adjust this somewhat to alter the tension on these belts as they wear slowly. I think you're supposed to be able to drop this down a little bit to increase the tension on the belts that go up to the headstock. where the main spindle is, and the pull and the chuck. But anyway, we'll have a look at that and we'll see that in the forthcoming videos if you continue to watch the video about me in the garage with the lathe itself. We'll see as I bumble about trying to find out what's going on, because I've got very limited access and vision as to what is actually going on. But we'll see that in the video anyway. But that's what I'm finding. I'm finding that, and that appears to be different from all the people on Facebook. They seem to have a clear space there to turn the belt, push it in, loop it over, and then pull it tight. So if we have a look at this, I will show you this book. I'll show you on a photograph. So looking at the headstock then, this is the piece of steel which I'm currently having trouble with. I have an oiler fitted here on my piece of steel, but this piece of steel appears to be attached through a shaft into the end of the pulley that we were looking at earlier on the inside of here. And the pulley, I'm not sure whether we can just see it here, but the pulley does slightly hang out of the back of the casting as well. So it's very awkward to get the belt between the pulley and the edge of the casting here. But this is the offending plate. I've loosened the two bolts off and drawn it forward, but I still can't get it out completely. These are the bolts which hold the fork mechanism in, which opens and closes the variator pulley arrangement. This is like holding the shaft, and the variator adjusting forks are either side of this shaft. So if anybody can help with this scenario and can explain to me please how to remove this, otherwise I'll have to come back up to the top of the lathe, I think, and remove all of this main spindle here, and then work down into the bottom to see what's in there. Because of all the mechanism in here, I can't see what's inside the headstock at the other side of here. That's my problem at the moment. So if anybody can help, thanks very much. I'd be glad to hear from you. So this is my Raglan 5-inch centre lathe, which I call Harry. And I call him Harry because of this St Christopher here. When I bought the lathe about 30 years ago, I found the St Christopher down in the tray at the bottom where all the filings were and all the turnings. I found it down there when I cleaned that out. And that always reminded me of the Sunday Songs of Praise programme, which was hosted by Harry Seacombe at the time. So I affectionately called the lathe Harry and kept this St Christopher in the top corner of this splashback. So I've removed the cover off the top of the lathe here. It's just a cast iron cover that goes across there, and it's held in by 4 long bolts, because it's quite a deep cover obviously to cover this wheel here. And the V-belt for the motor goes onto that part there. There's the motor to the right, the green one, and there's the V-belt pulley. So the mission today is to undo this fork here somehow and remove this side of the pulley so that I can put the belt into this void area here, and then pull the belt towards the motor shaft, so at this end here it will be slack, and I should then be able to fish it over the bit that we can see there down in the bottom. So I've set up this little lamp here so we can actually see what's going on in this headstock, and basically what we need to do then is to if we look down the back of the lathe, what we need to do apparently is loosen this piece off here and remove it, thereby removing this side of this V pulley, so we can slide the belt into that space, hook it onto the other end of the second pulley, which is in there. We can get it over the flanges of that pulley down there, which you can just see, which is the orangey rusty section, and it should fit onto there. And then once we've got it onto there, we can quite simply put this piece, he says, put this piece back on, trapping the belt within the V of these two flanges, and then we should be set to go. And this lever here that we can see operates this bearing piece here, which will open or close the V on these pulleys, and that's operated by this lever here. There is a lever that goes on here and clamps onto it tightly, and you simply move the lever one way or another to turn this, which in turn moves these forks here, and in so doing it will open or close this pulley here. And whilst it's opening and closing this pulley here, it's adversely opening or closing the other pulley, which is down at the bottom of this headstock down there, the one that we can see that's looking rusty. I can't put my hand in there because you wouldn't see anything, but there is a pulley down there. We can see the shiny silver shaft that it runs on, and we can see the rusted edges of it. Well, hopefully I'll get a better look at it later. So you'll notice now I've put this rag down behind the machine, because obviously I'm going to drop something at some point. So I've put this rag down there to stop it falling any further than perhaps hopefully it will. And what I've undone is two Allen grub screws that go into these forks here. I've just undone those two, and I think there's some kind of a keyway shaft here. Not sure whether you can see that, but I think there's a key shaft in there. So what I'm aspiring to do now, hopefully, is remove these two bolts down here, which will hopefully free this piece up here, so it and these can come off this shaft, leaving that keyway or whatever, that woodruff key. So let's see how we go with that. Back in a moment. So I've undone the two bolts that were holding this plate on, or so I thought, and I've just put them up there. I didn't know whether there were going to be nuts on the back or not, but they're screwed into some kind of a casting somewhere. So those bolts just came out on their own. But unfortunately it hasn't left me this loose. I was hoping this piece here was going to be then loose, but it doesn't seem to be loose, so I'll have to work on that and see how that comes off. So as we can see, we've got movement of the shaft now. This is what I'm calling the forks, if you like, and then this piece here is the bracket that fastens onto the head of the machine and is actually forming some kind of a bearing for that round shaft that all this is assembled on. So once they're loose, it's a case of working the way along slowly. This piece has actually got a slot in it, such that it will go over that strip that's in there, that rough cut key. And you've just got to be careful, because you might drop something off, which is why that cloth's there, to catch it all. And what I did, I cleaned up the shaft with a cloth, that was beyond, so all of this would slide off nicely, hopefully. So I've already had this off just to ensure that it does work, and that's how it comes off. So if we have a look at this piece now, this fork, these are the screws that are adjusted and go up against this brass collar, if you like, on this variator pulley. It's a little bit dusty, and as we can see, hopefully you can see, there is the keyway, the slot, which accepts and runs over the top of that woodruff key that's fastened into the shaft. So hopefully that woodruff key won't come out of that hole that it's fastened into in the shaft. And basically these are the screws. When it goes back into position, these screws here, these cap head Allen screws, will want fastening back in to locate it securely on the shaft when it's in position. And this is the other piece that was fastened onto the machine. It was fastened in that orientation like that, and again we can see that there is a keyway, and that actually sits onto that woodruff key when all this is completed and put back together. And the two bolts that we took out go through these big holes here, and there are two dowel pins on the head of the machine stock, which we'll have a look at just now, but those dowel pins go into there to line it all up and space it precisely for this bearing effect here. We'll have a look at those dowel pins and the screw holes. So there's the two screw holes that the screws go into, and we can see the two dowel pins that locate into these corresponding holes in this bracket that we've just slipped off. It wasn't easy to get off. I went on Facebook and some kind people replied back to my post, and I was advised to use a copper face hammer just to try and loosen the items off, which I did. And basically I was just tapping onto these parts of the castings very close to the shaft, because I didn't want to put any stresses on the casting itself and crack it, fracture it or break it. So I just went really close up against these collars, if I could, with the hammer, just tap, 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 and tap, 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 tap around these faces, just to try and break it free. As you can understand, it's been on there for years and years, maybe 50 years. So that's how I loosened it off to start with. And then, to try and further prevent any damage, I used this piece of 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch wood, and I used this small nylon face hammer just to tap tap again from some distance out here with the piece of wood. Let's just pop that in there. So that went over the top of there and down onto the shaft, and then I could quite clearly tap this end with the hammer, clear of any obstructions. And so that was just up against the collars like that, and I was tapping again, tap 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 with the nylon face hammer as close again to the shaft as I could, such that again I didn't put any stresses or strains on the casting itself by hitting it out here. So I hit it as near as I could to the shaft like that, and likewise with this, again I had to drift that off with this Again, I tapped it with the copper mallet and then put this wood up against it, and again tapped it off nice and gently as best I could all the way around, without near to the shaft as I could, trying to keep it square, etc. And it just drifted off the dowel pins there and away from the bolts, because the bolts were out obviously. So that's what we've ended up with, these pieces on the bench now. Well, that's what they look like, and that's how they come apart. And then down here is the pulley itself, the radiator pulley, and I marked up this particular piece here because this is the top of the pulley as I disassembled it from here. It's some kind of a thrust bearing in there. So I think the best thing to do is for me to take that off camera, when I can use two hands, and lay it down so that it doesn't fall apart effectively. I'll get back to you. So I'm getting a little bit nearer with it. I've noticed now that there is another woodruff key set into this shaft here. So I've cleaned as much rubbish off as I could, because the bearings started to bulk up against any rubbish that was on there. So I've cleaned that off as best I can. I'm going to put the woodruff key to the top of the shaft, because I don't want to risk it falling out. And I'm not sure how tight it is in the keyway that it's sat into. So this now should come across there, but again I'll have to do it two hands so I don't drop anything. So I am actually getting there, but what I found is that this pulley is very tight to get off the shaft. So what I've done, I've cut some grooves on this piece of timber such that it just nicely fits in almost between these cones of this V pulley, and then I'm just tapping it down very gently again with a just tapping it down again with the nylon face hammer very gently, because all the stresses that I'm banging into that now are actually on the motor bearings, so I don't want to do too much hammering and banging here. Ideally, if I had space, I could put a gear puller in there against the end of the motor shaft and round the back of this pulley and ease it off nice and steady with like that, but I haven't got the space to do that, and I haven't got a gear pulley either. So I'm using the fixed side of the flange to drift off the moving side further down the shaft, but again, as I say, doing it very gently. And I think what I'll do next, rather than put any more banging onto the shaft, I'll put a clamp across the top of here, across the top of this wood, and then turn the wood, which effectively will go onto diagonal corners then, and ease off this pulley a little bit further without putting any more stresses on the bearings of the motor. So that's my next step, and I've put some WD-40 now all around on this face here, and also inside this motor shaft here, in this round piece here up against the motor shaft that it's coming off. I've doused that with WD-40 to help hopefully ease this thing off. So let's see how I go with that. So currently we're not doing very well. We're still trying to remove this pulley from the motor shaft, which is here, and we can see these two keyways here that this pulley is riding down on, and I've just pushed my finger into the end of the shaft here to see where the motor shaft is, and worryingly enough I found this piece of steel just lying inside there. So quite where it's fallen from, what its purpose is, and whether I'll ever get it back in, I do not know. But it came from inside the shaft. Maybe when I get this pulley off, there's some kind of a keyway shim that belongs to, but I can't feel anything with my finger. So we'll see how we go. Ideally, a gear puller would have been the thing to pull that off, but unfortunately I haven't got one. I've tried bits of wood in like that and then twisting it to try and force one pulley against the other to force it off, but I've still not been successful. And I've tried with the soft face hammer to knock some wood up against here as near to the shaft as I could, so as not to well, I'm still struggling to remove this pulley here, this pulley side, and I'm not sure that I actually need to do so, because I think the penny's dropped a little bit late with me, but unfortunately for me I've had that pin drop out, that piece of steel drop out from inside here, but with my finger in there I can actually feel the keyway where it fits, so I'm not really sure what's going on with that. The keyway I'm feeling in there may well be just the clearance to go over these two here, but if that's the case, what is this piece here? But in any event, without perhaps having to take this pulley right off, I may be able to get the belt onto the shaft that I want it to. If we look inside the lathe headstock here, this down here is the pulley that we need to get our belt onto, this rusty pulley down here. That's where we need to get our belt onto, and as far as I'm aware there's no bearing on this side. There's no shaft on this side of the pulley. It's just sat on the end of a pulley which goes this way. So in theory, that being the case, then I might now be able to push to get my belt through the hole at the bottom here, which is where it comes, and onto the end of that pulley. If we come over here, the pulley will be something similar to this. It will have two flanges obviously, but if there isn't a shaft all the way through, I just need to get this belt past the end where there is no shaft coming out. So I'm still struggling then to try and remove this outer flange, but the fact of the matter is, I think the penny may have dropped with me now, that the real obstructions were on this shaft here, and I've already got them off. So now I can proceed, as long as I can get the belt over this pulley sidewall and into here. That's all we should need, because then I need to feed the pulley over this shaft that's in the middle of here onto this pulley. We can see the other pulley down here. This pulley is the same as the one that we're just trying to dismantle, but this one hasn't got a shaft to the left hand end of it. I'll just show you what I mean in a moment, but it's just got a shaft going through the right hand side here where these other belts attached to. So if I can feed my belt through this gap down here where you see my fingers coming through there, that's what we need to do, get the belt through that gap and over this pulley into that space where my finger is. And hopefully now we've moved that out of the way. We needn't have moved it quite that far, I don't think, but now we've moved it some distance, we can actually get the belt in, I feel. Let's just have a look at what's going on at this end here. This is what we're actually trying to do. We've got a pulley in the lathe, in the headstock of the lathe, and it's just sat on a bearing like that. There is no shaft out of this side to support anything, so this belt should now be able to come past that, over the flanges and into the belt and into the pulley like that. That's what we're aiming to do. Get that into there. And now we've moved this this side wall of the pulley, we should be able to feed that into that gap like that, and then squidge it down, feed it through the little hole that's down in the bottom of there where my fingers came through, and onto this second pulley. Now that's going to be a struggle, but that's the way it goes. Apparently that's what should happen. And then if I can get that on there, all I should need to do is push this other side of the flange back on, and hopefully locate back on these two woodruff keys here. But I'm not sure then about that piece there, what that is all about. But in any event, I'll try and get that belt through that little gap, as I say. Right, so I've just tried that and I've come across another problem, because if we look down the back here, I'll just rearrange that light. This is the shaft that we needed to clear, and we need to get the belt onto this pulley here. And you can just see the flange of the pulley is so near to this shaft here that the belt is too thick to go between that gap. So that's another stumbling block now. Got to consider that, but I don't want to take the lathe apart really. The idea was that this should have just been a slip fit now through that space and over the pulley inside the headstock. So I thought I had it cracked, but unfortunately not. Let's see what happens. Well, it's another day, but we've still got the same issue, the same problem. We've got the big belt to fit between this gap here on the edge of the pulley and this shaft here that had the fork on it originally. Need to fit the belt between that little gap there, which is not really much bigger than getting your fingernail through really. That's as far as my finger can actually try to go through there in that gap. So it is very close. I've just got my fingernail on the edge of the pulley. So it's very tight indeed between there and there. Now there is a little bit of waggle on that shaft, but I think to get that bit of waggle, this operating handle for speed here needs just moving about a little bit. According to the instructions, you're not supposed to move this unless the lathe is running, but I rather suspect that is with the belt on this rear pulley, etc., when the mechanism is connected onto this shaft here, the forks and the finger as we're calling it. When all that is connected on there, you risk fracturing or breaking some of the castings, I think, if you move this. But I rather suspect, with it not being on at the moment, when I move this handle there is a little bit of movement before it actually gets tight on anything, at which point I'm not stressing it any further than that. But whilst I'm moving that, it does give me a little bit of waggle on that shaft, which might help. But then I've still got, if I can get the camera down there, let me show you the back side if I can. The issue I've still got is actually, there's the pulley, so there's a little bit of gap at the bottom where I could perhaps get the pulley down and through that gap, but it's 22mm wide, the pulley, so I'm really struggling to get any sort of angle on it and such. There's the shaft with the keyway that the fork and the finger fasten to. There's the pulley. I'll try and turn this light on so we can see a bit better. There we go. So there's the pulley. And there's the shaft in very close proximity to the pulley, which doesn't allow me much to get the belt between that shaft and the flange of the pulley. And then of course the pulley is tied up against the casting, if you like, of the lathe itself, which, if I can just do it, is the blue bit on the left. Sorry, I've lost my pointing screwdriver. But as you're looking at that, to the right of the pulley, that's the casting of the lathe then. So I'm beginning to think that maybe one of my better options might be to drill and grind a bit of the lathe casting away that we can see there, the blue, adjacent to the pulley, so that I can get the pulley belt down between the pulley and the casing of this headstock, if you want to call it that. But even if I enlarge the space between the pulley and the headstock casting, if I drill and machine a bit of that away, then I'm still left with actually trying to get the thickness of the belt. Where is it now? The thickness of the belt between the end of this shaft and the pulley there, because that is not a big gap at all to try and get a belt through. So twisting it to get it through there, it would be an immense job, but let's see how I go on. And of course I've no access to the back of the lathe, so I'm just having to work over the headstock all the time, and this is my aspect of vision. Take two. So this is the pulley arrangement at the moment. I've got the belt now over this pulley, which was the stumbling point. You can't get the belt over these flanges and the flanges in the lathe at the same time. So this flange here needed moving apart, but maybe only far enough to get that belt in between like that, so it can pull tight up against this shaft if necessary, thereby giving us more play at this other end of the belt in this headstock. We can just see the belt here coming through this hole. There's the screwdriver now at the side of the belt, so I'm trying to bring it in that way at the moment to try and fish it onto the pulley there, and then try and rotate the pulley, but I don't know how I'm going to go on with that, so I'll keep you posted. Bye for now. So let's just go back a little bit. Unfortunately, I was talking nonsense earlier. It's just the penny's just dropped with me again now. I do not need to get the belt between this shaft that we can see here. I do not need to get the belt between that shaft and the end of this pulley. What I need to do is get the belt through the gap at the side, and I can just fish the belt down the other side of the pulley before it goes through the gap in the back of this casting. Let me try and take you there. So dropping now down the side of the lathe again. The penny's dropped. I don't need to get the belt between this shaft here and that pulley. What I need to do is, when I'm offering the belt into the back of the lathe, I need this part of the belt to be on the lower side of this shaft, such that it will, but I'm still struggling. Ideally I should be able to get the belt, not sure whether we can see that or not. I know it's very difficult to understand what's going on, but I need to get this belt between this pulley here and this casing here. So I think my best bet, to be honest, might be actually to drill and break away some of this excess casting, because it doesn't need to be this thick, I'm sure it doesn't. And I don't think that removing or damaging that casting is going to make any difference to the lathe, apart from the fact that I might actually be able to get the belt on. So let's try and get another little view of what's going on down the back of here. What I'm currently trying to do is get this belt through this gap here. This is the casting, where my finger is, this is the casting that's causing the issue. And this belt, if we can see it there, is too wide to go down between the pulley and the casting, and to twist the belt 90 degrees at this particular point here, such that I can slide it down sideways there, that would be the ideal solution. But being as it's a very strong belt, wide belt, I'm really fighting against actually being able to twist it whilst it's sat on the pulley there, because all I need to do is pop this belt inside the machine over the flange of the pulley, and then, so effectively looking at that shaft, if that were the pulley, I need to put it into the machine over the flanges of the pulley, and then pull it back into that V of that pulley, and then I can reassemble this part of my rear pulley. So it's nothing of a job if I can get that belt, or it shouldn't be anything of a job if I can get that belt through that gap. And as we can see, the casting down here is really fouling that. So another centimetre, another 10mm space would have been fine really. And if I'm strong enough, etc., to twist this belt through 90 degrees so it can go through sideways like that, or maybe even take down some of the teeth on the belt, grind some of them down a little bit to gain a couple of millimeters, because the teeth of the belt are not actually used, it's the sides of the belt that it's running on. But that's the issue, that's where I'm struggling, just to get that belt down this gap here. If I could get it through there, I'd be on with a chance. Well, I've got to try and get this Jeep across the desert somehow. So what I'm currently doing is trying to file some off the casting, such that it will give me a little bit more space to get the belt through. That's a very, very, very tight fit. I think I'm only just about taking the paint off at the moment, but the casting's probably 6mm thick. So if I can just get a little bit off that, that would help. Maybe a Dremel or something like that. But I'm cautious, I don't want to be damaging this shaft that we can see in the background as well. And inside, if I bring the lamp round, inside there we can hopefully see the file there, just working on the casting at the side of the pulley, just to create that bit more space for the belt to go through, because it's a very, very tight fit. But it's not just this part of the casting that's troublesome, it's the upper part as well. So I'll just have to see how I go on, but never mind, I'm just trying to open that gap a little bit and see how we go on. Well, it's nearing the end of the day again, and we still haven't got the belt fitted. But what I have been doing, I've been using this battery drill, and I've removed the battery from it just now because I've tie-wrapped the trigger in so that I don't have to press the trigger all the time. And I'm using something like a 3/16 drill, or maybe a little bit bigger, and I'm just poking that down into the hole between the pulley and the casing, and I'm just trying to machine away a bit of this casing at this side such that I can get the belt through the little gap. I'm just trying to make the gap a little bit wider by machining away some of this casting at this side low down. But I'll take you around the corner then, we'll have a look. So hopefully that gap that's down there between the casing at the side and the pulley will become wide enough for me to just slide the belt through at 90 degrees to what it sits on the pulley itself. There's no way I'm going to get the belt through in its inline situation, so it's got to turn through 90 degrees to come through that gap and down the side of that pulley. But let's see how we continue and go on. I'll continue with the drill for now. So here we are again, we're still on with the lathe and we're still trying to get this belt on. I've got plenty of light on the subject, which is what you need, because I'm working down the back of the lathe. I've even got a little head torch here as well. And I've got this light, which was an idea from Tom Parham on one of his videos, and it's a flexible light on a magnetic base, and it switches on. It's plugged into the main, so it's a 230 volt light. And I've got this switch here, and I can either have it off, minimum brightness, medium brightness, or maximum brightness. So that's 3-position switch on that, so that's great. And as I say, it's magnetic, so I can just move it about and angle poise it where I want. So down into the headstock here. And of course we're still trying to get this drive belt onto this variator pulley at the back there that's on the motor, and onto the one that's in the headstock down here. As we pointed out before, this is the this here are the sides of this pulley. I'm trying to get the belt into this middle section of this pulley, and I'm having to try and bring it in through this hole that's down here where you can see the screwdriver and the light. I'm trying to bring it in through a hole there, but what's happened is I've been really struggling, because if I take you over the back, as you've seen before, now we're looking at it from where I can see, the distance between the pulley and the casting is very little. And in fact, I've been on the phone to Tony this morning, from Tony at Lathes, where I got the book from, and I've been talking to him about it, and he says it's a struggle to get the belt in, which I'm finding. But what I've been doing to aid me is I've been grinding away, drilling and grinding away and chiseling away some of this side casting at the side of the pulley. I've been drilling and grinding some of this away, to which end I've been even using this little grinder here with what appears to be a dental burr on it, and the dental burr seems to work quite well on the casting. And I've also been using my battery drill and I've purchased one of these flexible bendy things which comes round here to this drill chuck. And when I've been using that, and I've got this burr as well, this again, it's like a dental burr but it's a large one, and I've had that running, and I've put the drill onto the lowest torque setting that I could put it on, such that when this came up against resistance, if it was too much for the drill would ratchet and I would know to stop and move the tool, because I've actually broken one of these in the meantime. I snapped it off inside here somewhere, because inside here is only a very thin piece of steel, and even with the drill on the lowest ratchet setting that I could put it to, and I didn't have it on drill mode, I had it on screw mode, as if I was putting a screw into a piece of timber or something. So I had the drill set onto screwing mode rather than drilling mode, and onto the lowest ratchet I could have for torque setting, to try not to break this somewhat delicate tool that I've bought here. But in any event, one broke anyway, and working alone I've had to tie wrap the trigger in, which makes it insane then, because if this gets stuck for any reason, I can't quickly release the trigger. I've got to remove the battery, so that's been very problematic. So I've been trying to hold the drill etc in various vices. We've got a vice over here, so I've held it in this drill vice, and then the flex has gone round the back of there and down into the back of the machine. And as I said, I've been grinding away at the side of these casting here, where you can see my finger in there. I've been grinding that away to give me more clearance from the side of the pulley to the casting itself. And it's still tight even now, but I can get my finger up. Before I couldn't get my finger in that gap, so I've ground that much away that I can actually get my finger in there. But this lathe is massively overbuilt, I would think, such that the amount of removed from that casting won't matter one bit for the accuracy of the lathe. It's very well built. But I'm beginning to think now I'm still struggling in that I think I found something else that's preventing me getting my belt in through this gap down here. It's got to go in through that gap there where the ruler is going, into the headstock, and then loop round the back of this pulley that we can see down in the bottom, down here where that is going there. I need to get the pulley in there. But I've been looking at it and thinking about it, and now I think that there is some kind of a shaft coming through from the left hand side of this lathe into that pulley that's down there, such that I can't actually get the belt round the end of the pulley, which I thought I could do. I thought I could bring the belt round the side of the pulley and into the headstock, and the pulley does have a boss on it very similar to this, but I also think now that there may well be another shaft coming in this side and into here, and I'm going to remove a piece off the lathe now to try and see whether that's correct. And what I'm thinking it is, if you recall, I've already removed a bracket from here that was sat on the dowel pins, and that went over to this shaft here. Now I'm thinking I need to remove these two bolts here. There's one there and one there. Let me move the light round for you a bit. There we go, a little better now I hope. So this is a 5/8 spanner, and what I intend to do is remove this bolt here and another bolt that's here. And whilst I've been looking at this, I've also found, which I didn't know existed, an oil hole here, which makes me think this must be a bearing of some description in there. I'll just get my head torch and we'll have a look at that. So here's the little oiling hole that I've found on this piece of steel. The oil hole is now covered up to stop any rubbish getting in, and then you twist this circle round and we can see the oil hole. So I'm thinking this is some kind of a bearing that goes through to the inside of here to hold the extreme left hand side of the main pulley in the head. Because if I now take my ruler and pop it in through the back side of the machine, down the side of the pulley there, down the side of the boss that's on the end of the pulley, I'm still hitting something. So I think that behind these two bolts here, if I remove this plate, which again I'm hoping is on dowel pins as the other plate was, to give it its true accuracy of positioning, I'm hoping that's the case. But I'm going to take these two bolts out and find out, and we'll have a look at that in a moment when I've taken that off. So I'm using a 5/8 spanner to do that. So currently then I'm midway through taking this piece of steel off here, and what I've done, I've also put some clamps there onto the edge of the motor pulley and hard up against this shaft here to try and hold this pulley in place, the one that's down there at the bottom, because what I'm finding is it is some kind of a bearing, and now I've loosened one of the bolts off, this thing is actually moving, and so too is all of the, I'm not sure whether you can see it down there, but as I move this plate on the outside, the whole pulley system, this top belt here is now moving on that bottom part down there, and the main drive pulley that I'm trying to get onto is also moving. So once I remove this piece here, I don't know what will happen to these bits in here. So I've braced it with that wrench there, such that it won't go too far, hopefully, while I assess what's going on and how much more I dare take off. This could be where it all goes completely boobies up and the lathe gets rubbished off. But let's see. So what I had to do, I could use a ring spanner on this one here, but on the other bolt I had to use an open-ended spanner because of the close proximity of the gears down here. So now I need to try and remove that plate now without losing all of this pulley system and whatever bear. There must be a bearing somewhere under the middle of the screen there. There must be a bearing there, but it must be quite a loose fit because it's wobbling about quite a lot. We can see it all moving there quite a lot, so I'm not quite sure what will happen to this pulley once I remove this piece out here. So let's see. This lathe is absolutely insane. So I've taken the bolt out from here, I've taken the bolt out from here now, which on this side I think it may well be on a nut, a loose nut inside the lathe head, but I've not been able to establish that fact working on my own. But now that all that is loose, it's still not wanting to come away. I'm trying to pull it out this way and just twisting it to help it ease off the shaft, whatever. But I don't really want to damage the painted finish on this steel work here, because that tells me where this really wants bolting back to, if there's any precise thing, because there's no dowel pins on this. And I might have to remove this gear train here, such that I can get this thing off in any event. I just don't want to do that for fear of forgetting which gears are in which place. So it's not looking good for removing that plate. So we've decided now, Malcolm and myself, because I brought Malcolm round to help me because it's becoming a two-man job, I feel, and we've decided that this gear train needs to be removed to have any possibility of actually knowing what this thing is that's down there. So that's the next step. We're going to try and remove these gears, and the way we do that, we undo the bolt, and then we can undo the bolt that's in the end. Then we can slide this collar that's got a slot in it down the shaft of that bolt, and that then comes off, and then the gear has got a larger hole in the middle of it, and that gear just slides off then, says he. Nothing is ever simple. So it's going to be a two-handed job in any event to get these off. But these gears now, if we look at that, now we've removed that large collar, the size of the hole in the gear should allow us to pull it over the top of that nut.